Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Insurance Unlimited, a limited series podcast. I'm your host, Paul Willoughby, and my purpose today is to give our listeners some real-world insights into the tips and tricks on how to automate and transform insurance businesses. Over the last few episodes, we've been touching on the concept of automation in insurance. We're seeing a lot of experimentation in AI, and we're trying to help our clients add value by bringing it to life in the form of real-life concepts and how people are tackling AI. We do this by leveraging some of our market-leading insurance contacts. And today I'm joined by Nigel Walsh, Head of Insurance from Google Cloud, Ellie Barlow, Non-Exec Director, and our very own Richard Pugh, Global SVP of Head of AI at Endava. Welcome all.
Good to see you, Paul.
So one of the things that we always like to cover off very first is a very quick introduction. And I always like to ask the question, how did you fall into insurance? Because nobody ever came out of university and said, I tell you what, I want to go into insurance. Well, at least they never used to. I think it may be changing. Ellie, we'd love to hear from you first.
I mean, I kind of did, so I don't know what that says. But I think my very early career, I was fortunate enough to go and join comparethemarket.com, who are, probably still one of the largest disruptors in the insurance space in the UK, and ran the general insurance business there for a while before moving across to Money Supermarket, and then having the opportunity to work with a number of different clients across consultancy and then as a non-exec director. So lots of opportunity to be really nosy and find out about all the really exciting things that different people are doing on their journeys to improving the industry and getting rid of that reputation that means people don't want to leave university and come straight to us.
That's a good point. That should be our total ambition, shouldn't it? I mean, I spend an awful lot of time trying to coax young people into insurance, but I need something a bit more cement, a little bit more sexy to bring them in. Nigel, have you got anything in your locker that will help?
Well, to be fair, the brand that I work for is pretty damn cool in my mind. I might be biased. It's the first organization in my entire career. I said to my mum, hey, I work for Google. And she didn't say, who are they? What do they do? So we've got the brand awareness and we've got the, dare I say, the cool kids. That said, I'm still struggling to convince my 15-year-old son that insurance is the best place on the planet to be, given our purpose and so much more. I used to say, or my co-host on InsurTech Insider, Sarah Kachansky, now at FinTech Wales, always used to say, we've got self-driving cars and drones. It was actually a really good hook to get people into insurance. But probably like many others, dare I say, I was in the software world. Someone said, hey, can you focus on insurance? And I said, I didn't know anything about it. That was probably 20-something years ago. And I've done nothing since insurance. I'm totally in love with it, given our purpose, our mission, and nothing in society moves without us. So, dare I say, fell in, but hopefully the next generation may not.
Rich, how did you fall into it?
Well, I'm not sure. I kind of fell, and I probably kind of reversed slightly. And I think I'm a statistician and a data scientist by training, right? So I spent my early career building models across all sorts of industries, so insurance, pharmaceutics, finance, and so on. And I set up my own organization to help help companies to leverage data science, analytics. And I think it just happened to be at a time where insurance was looking at different data sources, looking at maybe non-standard ways of building models. And so I was able to really kind of cut my teeth in insurance, if you like, through the lens of actually what's a different way of thinking, right? Beyond the sort of legacy approaches and models that we've been using for 50 years, what's new, and so that's kind of how I got in. So I'm very much a data scientist at heart still. And I think when I'm talking about AI with insurers, it's from that practical perspective in terms of like, how do you really drive value in an organization? And from that perspective, I think Nigel's spot on. I think it's a great industry, right? I think there's so much opportunity, in terms of to leverage data and drive great outcomes. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You sort of lead me on to the first question, really. So I feel like a lot of the time we talk about AI, and we've done a podcast on this. It's always about operational cost and saving costs and taking the grunt away. And a lot of the POCs we're seeing are around that sort of operating model piece. Do you think there's a space for AI to sort of generate new revenue streams in insurance? Or do you see AI as a use for growing revenue? Nigel, I'll go to you first.
The short answer is yes. I mean, let's if I break down our strategy here, there's three core pillars that we have for insurance, but one of them is around personalization and hyper personalization, which of course then leads to how do you engage brokers, agents, consumers, or otherwise in a much more individualized way. I've often talked about things like mass personalization for a segment of one, and the role of AI or generative AI has come along and made that so much easier for people to pick up on. We did a recent study of about 2,500 organizations on the ROI of Gen AI. And I think something like 74% of the respondents said they found ROI in Gen AI use cases, and something like 30 to 35% actually helping people grow their revenue for what they had. So that report's available publicly online, well worth having a look at. It's broken down by industry and so much more. But yeah, absolutely. If there's tasks that were done manually previously that we can remove some of that toil from and make life much more personalized and individual, then I think we can use it to do or to grow revenue. That said, I think a lot of our initial use cases have been focused on cost out and optimization. So once we've got past that first hurdle where people have actually built or understood that, hey, this is working, we've proved it, we can now do these things, then they'll move into more complicated or complex use cases like revenue growth and so much more. But honestly, our market's been very much focused on hey, let's keep taking cost out and making lives easier for our employees and customers.
So I suppose you've had some pretty tough conversations with some of your clients around, they're probably focusing on the operational aspects of it. Is it a tough ask to sort of get them into the mindset of actually seeing this as a revenue growth opportunity?
No, not at all. I mean, it depends who you speak to. If you're speaking to operations and we're looking in and down, we're looking at how we optimize. But if you're looking at distribution or otherwise, you're looking up and out. One of the things I get asked quite a lot, which is a really interesting debate, is what's the future of personal assistants using Gen AI? Now, imagine those, and we've got to be careful, we straddle the lines between advice and guidance. But imagine a world where you've got an assistant there that can understand your offerings or the market's offerings, and we can actually dig into that to try and get insights that are right for me in context. Hey, I'm a 21-year-old male looking to retire when I'm 65 or whatever it might be. Neither of those are probably true. I'll be working much later. I'm not 21. But given the context of what we've got, help me understand that huge corpus of information out there and then guide me to the right products or insights that I should be doing going forward. And I think it's very different in regulated to non-regulated industries, but we're seeing much more of that take place where we can bring all that information together today and actually start to give you what we would have done in a price comparison website or elsewhere going forward. So I'm actually very optimistic about what this will do for financial services and more.
Yeah, I mean, Ellie, that brings you on. Your background has been in price comparison and aggregators. Do you have this conversation with clients as a non-exec director?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Nigel's point is a really relevant one, which is it's about context. And a lot of customers don't understand the value of their insurance until they have to claim on it. As we know, less than 10% of customers actually have to do that in a year. And it's at that point that they have the first exposure as to whether or not they're actually appropriately covered or not. And I think one of the exciting revenue growth opportunities for me, much to Nigel's point, is the ability to be able to understand the context of an individual and to be able to guide them to the correct insurance case. And I remember seeing an advert a few years ago now, and it was a Direct Line Group advert, actually. It was a home insurance. And it basically said that if you experienced some sort of issue at home and you had a loss of goods, that you could call them and they would replace them within 24 hours. So you've had a flood and your TV's blown up, or in my house, the Xbox has floated off down the hallway and your children are killing each other and nobody wants to be in that situation at all whatsoever. And it really made me think about what that process would look like in practice. Now, back in the early days, the way we used to explain home insurance to customers was take your house, shake it upside down. If it hits the floor, you should be insured for it. But most customers won't have an accurate view about all of the different goods that are inside their house, and therefore are probably woefully underinsured for most of the risks that they actually face. Now, you imagine the ability to be able to tap into some of these data sources, to use AI and different technologies to be able to, first of all, actually provide customers with a better view of what their risk exposure is by cataloguing their items, recognizing them, understand what they cost, understand what the new replacements look like. Having the ability to store a record of that item, because now we can use different technologies to be able to recognize images and to be able to index them and understand what they are in context and quickly. And then the ability to be able to serve a personalized insurance quote to that consumer. You first of all got a revenue opportunity because you're insuring customers for their actual situation rather than under-insuring them. You've got a physical record of the state of goods that are inside a house at any one point in time. So that's brilliant. When you start thinking about the claims experience, it's quicker. And there's counter fraud opportunities in there as well, because, you might be able to use images of room sets to be able to understand the actual condition of an item prior to any sort of issue or claim event. And, so I think there are so many quite simple opportunities to be able to just better explain to customers what they need, why they need it, but also to give them the confidence that we understand them well enough to serve them properly in the instance that they do need to make a claim. And I think, unfortunately, there is still a significant consumer perception that we don't understand consumers as individuals and that we will let them down at point of claim. So I think the use cases for revenue growth are great, but for me, it comes back to how do we do the right thing for the right customer at the right price and on the right terms? And if you get that right, whether it be reducing somebody's cover, increasing somebody's cover, or changing the terms, then you will get all of the other financial benefits anyway, because your business will be stickier.
Yeah, I mean, you've just described a complete differentiator, right? So, you line up 7 insurers against a wall. They all look and feel the same. The products are the same, but how you make me feel, how you show up when I need you is the differentiator. And I hear Rich talks about that a lot when he's in with clients. Rich, what's your perspective on this? Are you having similar conversations?
Yeah, very much so. Look, if you think about what AI allows us to do, right, is to build smarter, leaner, more engaging organizations, fundamentally, right? We can, and I think that the cost reduction, the automation, I think that has been a big focus, because I think particularly with Gen AI, the capability is very inspiring. I think a lot of kind of technology kind of leaders have been kind of pushing, automation stories and so on, and the savings and so on, I've seen are very significant. Right? I do think there are other elements, and I think that, Nigel and Ellie have already kind of talked about them, but for me, it's about making better decisions, right? How do I actually, for me, like insurance is like, from an operational perspective, talking as a practitioner, it's like a decision engine, right? So how do I actually make those decisions in the right way and so on? So there's that piece, right? So, and I think that AI can help us just make more informed decisions to help us to achieve our maybe commercial goals. But alongside of that, you get that hyper-personalization piece. And I think I like the way that Nigel was talking about it earlier. I was talking to a customer the other day, a personalized insurer, who's talking about, well, we've got one kind of employee for every 800 customers or something, so actually providing a kind of personalized service is kind of impossible in terms of the commercial model. But if you take some of these emerging sort of agent-based AI techniques, then all of a sudden you can address the balance. You can have an agent for every customer. You create a digital twin of your entire organization using that. You can be far more, kind of segment of one Nigel mentioned earlier, which I think I've seen a lot in retail, for example, right? I think those concepts we can apply, in a really beneficial way, both commercially, but also to the benefit of our customers, right? So I think there's all sorts of opportunity. The challenges are about being ready, building the foundations, and ultimately choosing the right use cases, right? That's a critical piece.
Yeah. If I add quickly to Richard and Ellie's point, the other thing I think that's important with AI, and again, specifically Gen AI, is the ability to leverage transparency. So we know, rightly or wrongly, most consumers don't read their insurance policy. They have an expectation of what they've bought, but they may not have actually read the T's and C's, whether you're speaking to an insurance professional or my mum and dad off the high street or whatever it might be. But if we can help people make all that conversational and transparent through AI, we've got a much better chance of actually educating them and making them aware of what they are covered for and what they're not covered for. And I think if we use AI in that way, we're able to help make lots of these large corpuses of information or documents or T's and C's much more conversational. And as a result of being conversational, I'm now able to make them transparent to the end users. So my expectations are much more aligned with what I've bought and what I've been sold or purchased in the first place.
Brilliant. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think, we see a lot of these proof of concepts that people are doing. I've seen some production instances of AI being used more in the complex side of things. Question for you, Ellie. When you're advising boards, these businesses, these insurance businesses, have so much to worry about. There's just so many overlapping strategic agendas. Everybody lays awake worrying about everything. How do you get them into a position where they can successfully start implementing some of these AI strategies, or at least build a strategy in the first place?
I think that's a really interesting question. And when I think about the volume of clients I've worked with over the last 10 years that have been in the middle of 400 million pound legacy system transformations that have often not actually ended up with a new system at all whatsoever, it's easy to see that it's very difficult to get these sorts of things to the point where they fly and that they are then ingrained into organisations. I think the first thing for me is just being really clear on the guardrails. And I think even the way that we've started this conversation today was a little bit about talking about ROI and talking about operational improvement. And I think that sets the tone in a very specific way. And actually, I'd probably be a little bit bolder and say that they're the wrong objectives to set upon some of these sorts of programs in the first instance, because then you're placing a price tag on their heads immediately. So I think understanding the role of these sorts of technologies, being able to provide your organisation, your board, with good use cases and examples from other organisations and parallel industries is a good way of whetting the appetite about what the art of the possible in the future can look like. And getting executive sponsorship, immediately is really, really important too. I think a lot of organisations then rush into mobilising programmes without really thinking about where those programmes are going to sit. So, there are so many different models for this. Is it a side of desk thing that sits inside technology? Does it live with a data scientist? Does it sit in a specific hub somewhere else? So understanding the operating model, I think, is, the second step for that. And with that comes its own challenges as well. I think that you have to be able to understand the point upon which something stops being R&D and stops being exploratory, and how you're actually going to be able to move it back into a wider organisation and operationalise it. And again, if I had £1 for every time I've seen some really clever technologies, but they've never got off the ground because there's never been that understanding of how you actually make it plug and play with the wider organisation. And that's not always a technology point. Sometimes it's an ethos point, and it's a way of doing things point, and it's just simply that the human resources that you have inside your organisation can't work with those new skill sets or those new methodologies. So I think those sorts of things have to be considered really, really, really carefully. And, let's not shy away from the fact that there are a lot of people that have been in insurance for a very long time now who, are your classic kind of key man dependencies. We've got underwriters with wealths of knowledge. We've got London markets who've been going through modernisation for a long time. And, as we all know, there are individuals there that really do carry the keys to the castle. And they're very reticent to have that knowledge codified in such a way that it makes it easy for it to be taken over by the machine. So understanding how you work with your human capital in your organisation to make this appealing and not a threat, and so that they aid it as opposed to blocking it, really is a challenge. It needs to be exciting and not a replacement for that. And alongside it, I think the governance model is another area where, you don't want to stop a good programme from learning quickly and failing fast, but you do need to be able to understand how you're going to govern these sorts of technologies moving forwards, because you've got access to so much more data from so many different sources. And fundamentally, our regulators are very comfortable with that, on the proviso that we can clearly explain and demonstrate how a decision has been made, how it adheres to the principles that they enforce upon us around treating customers fairly, recent legislation and regulation. And that becomes harder and harder and harder to do the more you're defaulting to a box. So, again, I think that's a really important thing to get right earlier on. So I think a well-governed programme with exec sponsorship, not too much of a price tag on its head to start off with, but with enough thought and consideration about high-level use cases, parallels in other organizations, and the consideration of all of the different functions inside the organization to really understand how this gets lifted and shifted into being BAU has to be the starting point for that.
Yes, a really good point. I think, Nigel, we've seen sort of that part of what you've been doing at Google and what I've been doing, and Rich to some extent, is creating that curiosity around AI, and trying to create the FOMO, right? The fear of missing out amongst these boards. And I think, Ellie, you raised a really good point. I was a previous head of innovation, and I ran at every shiny object there was, trying to get, to get something in. And, it was the alignment of the strategic goals of the organization. Those were the things that landed, rather than something for the sake of the technology. Nigel, what do you see as, just an absolute number one rule with this, with getting things off the ground?
Start with the customer. I mean, it can't be any more difficult than that. We often lose sight of, to some of Ellie's points, which were spot on. We're often digitizing the old world rather than trying to reimagine the new world. And in some cases, that might be okay. If we're just trying to change a legacy process to something a bit more modern and agile, then that might be the right case. I'm a big believer. You'll have all heard of Google's moonshots, which are, these crazy bets that might seem crazy at the outset. But actually, you can't always jump from where we are today to a moonshot, and you actually need to have stepping stones to get there. You often hear us talk about roof shots to moonshots, which goes back into my mindset of think big, start small, act quickly. So I think these bite-sized chunks of demonstrable proof that says we're continuously improving, and either our customers or our colleagues are seeking or seeing benefit from doing these things is really, really important. Is, to Ellie's point, it's really easy to get stuck in a multi-year, multi-hundred millions of pounds project and never actually see the end or the light of day. We still need to do them, but there are many ways to actually get there. And I think those incremental, let's constantly iterate and change over time is actually really important. But I always start with the customer and work our way backwards, rather than start ourselves with a shiny object of old, Paul, and start going, what can this go fix? You might find something, but it might not be aligned to what the core business objectives are for that particular quarter or that particular year. And that's also a challenge in the industry, in that our incentives aren't always aligned to how long some of these things might take to get done. It might take you 12, 18, 24 months to do a core system migration, whereas our measurements might be quarterly or annually.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Nigel. And I think Ellie and Nigel both had talked about strategy and timescale. I think pace and change is so critical at this moment in time. I was on a panel at an InsurTech conference recently. We were talking about, is strategy still a thing, right? In terms of where do you set a horizon? Do I write a 5-year strategy or a 2-week strategy, or where do I position things, right? How do I get my North Star and know which way to drive? And I've seen it, because I went to a conference last year with one very famous company stood up and said they've done in the world of Gen AI, they did a piece of work, a 6-month piece of work. And what they generated in 6 months was brilliant and obsolete, is how they described it, it was brilliant in terms of the capabilities they built. But almost by the end of the project, it's almost like the technology had moved on so much in 6 months that actually what they built was kind of redundant, right? So I think one of the challenges right now, at a time where the innovation flywheel seems to be spinning so quickly, is to set your direction of travel, to really understand where you're trying to get to, and actually understand the mechanism for how you're going to actually take these emerging capabilities that are coming at us really, really quickly, and be able to actually feed them into, the change process in your organization, so you can leverage them for the benefit of customers, right? And I think that my sense right now is that the next wave of technologies after Gen AI, the agent-based stuff, is going to have such an impact on all sorts of areas of the business. And a lot of the conversations I'm having right now are about how we ensure organizations we work with are ready for that, to be able to adopt these things, right?
But you're talking about the next wave post AI or Gen AI, and most folks are still thinking about what they're going to do with Gen AI. So I think part of this needs to be, one of your former colleagues used to talk about, when you start a flight, you might set the flight path and direction, but midway through, you've got to take into account new weather, new conditions, changes to airspace, whatever it might be. And as a net result, have the agility to make those changes. And I think we have to have that mindset as we start these programs. Is that one of my old program directors always used to say to me, it's never a straight line, Nigel. And we have to be able to deal with lumps and bumps along the way that will course correct or whatever it might be, or completely change it. I mean, do we have the nous to be able to go, this isn't working, and stop it halfway through if it's not going in the direction that we need because our business direction has changed? I would say most folks would just keep going to get to the end rather than work out that we might not, when we land, we might be 30 miles from the airport we hope to get to in the first place.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the challenge right now is, if you're halfway through the flight and they invent the teleporter, what you do, right? So it's kind of like, that feels like what it's like. It's like, how do you keep track of this stuff? How do you prepare yourself for these emerging technologies, and how can we leverage them in a way that, is robust and repeatable and so on? But it's an exciting time, right?
I think
it is. Sorry, Ellie, carry on.
Sorry, Will. I was going to say, I think the other thing that we just have to be very mindful of is what customers are actually ready for. So if I think back to my early days in price comparison, 50% of the customers who shopped online on a price comparison site while searching for their renewal price that actually went on to switch offline with an insurer did so because they didn't trust the process. So they used it for the research, they'd filled in the form, a lot of work was put into these digital experiences and A/B testing and plain language and making it really easy. But fundamentally, these customers weren't confident with that as a way of transacting, and they needed to be able to speak to somebody on the end of the phone because they wanted to know if they got it wrong, there'd be a call recording somewhere and there'd be Marge telling them that they'd made the decision correctly in the first place. Simple things like we used to have, extra pages in between our results pages on a price comparison site and the insurer's site where we'd give the customers extra information about the policy that they were selecting. And we thought, we'll take the page out because then the customer can buy quicker, and won't that be good? The journey will be quicker and the customers will buy more. Well, they didn't because they weren't ready to make that decision at that point in time. So I think we have to think about the speed upon which customers want to adopt some of these technologies and get them comfortable with it in the first place. You've now got 80% of the UK car park who are going through a price comparison site without ever wanting to speak to a human on the other end of the phone at all. But we're also 25 years down the road with this now as well. So when we start talking about reams and reams and reams of information being synthesized and distilled down so that we can serve hyper-personal information to customers, do I think we'll get there eventually? Yes, I absolutely do. How do we educate customers that that information is going to be accurate and that it's going to be correct when it appears to them to be too quick and too easy to land in their laps? I don't know. And I think that's one of the challenges we have to face. So I think there is lower hanging fruit that we perhaps jump over looking for these new utopias and these new business models. And, I think we need to think about how we get some of the basics right and quickly. I've actually got a colleague who's been going through a motor insurance claim now for 19 months, and she was non-fault. The other driver was also insured by her insurer, and 19 months she's been waiting for a settlement now, and the driver that hit her got a 12-month ban, which she's since served, and she's still not even had her first offer from her insurance company.
That's crazy.
It's very crazy, and you'll be pleased to know that I'm right all over that one. I think.
Well, that's the exception rather than the rule, though, isn't it, Ellie? I'm hoping that's the exception rather than the rule. There's just we only ever hear of these cases rather than all the good ones.
I think you would hope so, but I think it is more common than you perhaps think it is in complex claims. And I remember Ian Hughes from Consumer Intelligence telling me a story once, and he was doing some work with a large UK personal lines insurer, and they were doing some work on their claims experience and claim satisfaction, and they'd had this customer and she'd had a non-fault claim. So her insurer battled and they went and got her a big car, and they promptly had it delivered, and they parked it on her drive. And when they parked it on her drive, it was overhanging from her driveway onto the road. She lived in a small terraced house, and there wasn't the room for this larger car. So it was slightly impeding the pavement that went past. And so the customer was absolutely petrified all week that she was going to have neighbours knocking on the door and telling her off because she was slightly blocking the road. Now, this customer had been with the same insurer for 15 years. She drove a Micra. very small car. She was an older lady and she did 3,000 miles a year. And the reason that she used her car was once a week so that she could drive to the hairdressers to go and get her hair done. And that was it. That was all she did. And so the insurance company think that they've delighted her because they've given her this bigger, beefier, sexier car, and it's, not them paying for it. So brilliant. Isn't it great? And actually, she didn't go to the hairdressers that week because she was too frightened of this larger car. Now, you look at something as simple as that, and you've got 15 years worth of application data telling you that this lady drives 3,000 miles. You've got 15 years worth of application data telling you the size of car that she actually drives. It wouldn't have been that difficult to have worked out the way that she used her car and to have got that claim right. And I think when you think about all the signals that we get from very basic data, like application data, like web data, it's millions and millions and millions of tiny voices that are screaming to be heard. But the subtlety exists in being able to understand them and apply a life context to them and understanding how a human is going to respond to that. And so I think for me, I find it much more exciting looking at some of the more simplistic cases that just make what we've got better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm going to wrap us up. I've got one last question for you, and there's still an awful lot of skepticism around AI and what it can do amongst boards, and actually most people who aren't in transformation will look at it and there'll be a fear factor of it. It's here to take our jobs, or it'll never get. What I do is, who's ever heard this one? What I do is far too complex for AI ever to understand what I do. I mean, we've all got experience of that one. What one bit of advice would you give to somebody who's in a transformation role and they're trying to get AI into the organization, or at least start experimenting with it? What one thing would you say to help break down those barriers? Rich, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think so. In terms of advice, I think that particularly with Gen AI, right, and some of the things we've seen recently, has been a very inspirational, very sort of tangible capability, right? So people can log on to, their favorite agent and ask it questions and write poems and so on. It's an amazing technology. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And it feels like magic at the moment. So I think that's really prompted people into having a go at this stuff. And we're seeing now situations where people have run at something and it doesn't quite go past the POC stage, right? So I think for me, this is really about understanding what's real, what's doable today, right? And actually selecting the right use case, right? To Ellie's point, there are some great use cases that are on the way to the really kind of, cutting edge stuff that are going to add value for us. So for me, it's about how do you prioritize the use case? How would you make sure that you don't brilliantly solve the wrong problem, which is so easy to do in this space, right? So how would you get to the right use case? I think the other thing for me as well is to just think about the way in which some of these techniques are going to change. Some good advice about that, the way in which these kind of technologies are coming at us, capabilities are coming towards us, and almost be able to be ready for that. So how do I get my house in order? How do I get the fundamentals right so that as these technologies come about, as these things mature, these capabilities, we can leverage them for the benefit of our organization. So for me, it's about use case prioritization and getting strong foundations in place so you can leverage these capabilities as they mature.
Perfect. I like that. Nigel?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it really simple. The ones I've seen most effective in this space are show, not tell. So we've been through a really decent process of being able to demonstrate or show what we can do in this space, whether it's use case or capability or examples. But the best way I've seen over the last couple of months is to bring it to the execs physically hands-on. I found most execs I speak to, whether they're non-exec directors or board members, are beyond articulate about the opportunity for Gen AI. Have they ever used it personally? More than likely not. So we did an exercise with a number of different boards recently where we brought in a number of pixel books, a workbook for us to work through, and guided them through either over 30 or 90 minutes, imagine if type scenario, going from the very beginning, hey, go write a poem, and take the function, whether you're a CRO, CFO, CEO, and questions designed for each and every one of those, or prompts that they could use to start seeing what Gemini or Flash or other things that we've got that would actually bring out in practice. And to see their eyes light up at the ability to go, my God, I've asked it some simple stuff and this is what it's come back with. Or I've given it an image of a claim and it's come back with insights. Or I've given it a video or a phone call transcript and this is what I've now got around sentiment or insight or so much more, with very little insight or training or whatever else. So the whole let's get hands-on, show not tell. Of course, we then got to go through the whole process of enterprise readiness, security, compliance, whatever else. But actually, I've never doubted the exec's ability to understand what the opportunity is, but to see it firsthand has been an eye-opener for me when they actually, back to your point about magic, to see the magic of what it can do.
Fantastic. Ellie, just finish off with yourself.
I think Nigel made really, really great points there. And I think I'd just add to that to just not let it be a threat. Make sure your organisation understands how they can use it to solve the problems that they know need to be solved. And they bring that subtlety and that human understanding to it so that it is a help and not a hindrance. Yeah,
brilliant. I mean, I think what I'm sort of reading underlined there and what I say and when I'm asked this question is, I kind of see it as a way of bringing agility to the organisation. So being able to we free up resources, but business models we're seeing are changing and changing faster than I've ever seen them before. Specifically, more probably in my world in the complex commercial space, but bringing in AI and its capabilities are going to give you that agility. And it's got to be the same to your point, Rich. We did a POC for a vendor. By the time they'd written the RFP process and sent it out, the technology had changed dramatically. They didn't need it anymore. And, it was a couple of £100,000 of money that was spent. And we were just saying, just get on with it,
Well, Paul, you and I had this debate last week directly, right?
Yeah.
I said, hey, we're not doing that because we could actually demonstrate it quicker than it would take to do the other piece. So actually, let's just prove it rather than write about it.
Yeah, I think more sandbox type experiments, allowing people sort of to get their hands on it, I think sort of summarizes what you've all been saying. So I'm going to wrap us up, and this has been really, really informative for me. I think what you've all done is brought some brilliant practical examples for people who are just getting on the journey, and also for those that are sort of in the middle of their journey as well, sort of how to land some of this stuff. I think the stuff around governance, something, as a head of innovation, I might have avoided in my time. It is so important when you're doing these things to make sure that you're articulating the benefits to the different personas that hold the purse strings, really. Thank you very, very much for giving up your time today. And we will be back in a couple of weeks with a new topic for Insurance Unlimited. I think we've done a few on AI now, so we're going to move on to a different topic. But thank you for your time.